The screech of metal against metal filled the subway car as Sarah Martinez gripped the overhead rail, her knuckles white with tension. At 7 months pregnant, every jolt of the train sent a sharp pain through her swollen ankles, and the crushing heat of the packed car made her vision swim with dark spots. She tried to focus on the advertisements above the windows, tried to count the stops until she could finally sit down at her desk job, but the world was tilting dangerously. The last thing she remembered before her legs gave out was the sensation of falling, the horrified gasps of strangers, and the cold, unforgiving floor rushing up to meet her. What happened next would change everything. Sarah thought she knew about judgment, about dignity, and about the invisible people we pass every day without truly seeing. Because the man who would save her life that morning wasn't the well-dressed businessman who stepped back in shock, or the young nurse who froze with her phone in hand. It was the man everyone had been carefully avoiding since he boarded 2 stops ago, the one with the weathered face and tattered coat who smelled of the streets, the one whose presence made passengers shift uncomfortably and look away. The homeless man nobody wanted to acknowledge was about to become the hero nobody expected. If you believe in second chances, in the power of kindness, and in stories that remind us never to judge someone by their appearance, please hit that like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to our channel. Because what you're about to hear will restore your faith in humanity. Sarah's collapse sent shockwaves through the subway car. Her body hit the floor with a sickening thud, her pregnant belly vulnerable, her face drained of all color. Passengers pulled out their phones, some to call for help, others simply to record, as if documenting tragedy from a safe distance. A woman screamed for someone to do something. A teenager yelled that they needed a doctor. But in that critical moment when seconds felt like hours, when Sarah's baby's life hung in the balance, it was the homeless man who moved with purpose and precision while everyone else stood paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. His name was Dr. Michael Chen, though nobody on that train knew it. They didn't know that 15 years ago, he had been one of the most respected cardiothoracic surgeons in the city, with steady hands that had saved hundreds of lives and a reputation that brought patients from across the country to his operating table. They didn't know that his fall from grace hadn't been his fault, that a drunk driver had killed his wife and daughter 5 years ago, that the grief had swallowed him whole like a black hole consuming light. They didn't know that he'd lost himself in that darkness, lost his practice, lost his home, lost everything except the muscle memory of decades spent saving lives. All they saw was a dirty coat, unkempt gray hair, and hands they assumed had never held anything more valuable than a cardboard sign begging for change. But those hands knew exactly what to do. Michael dropped to his knees beside Sarah's unconscious form, his fingers immediately finding the pulse point on her neck. Weak and thready but present, he tilted her head back to open her airway, his movements efficient, and practiced despite the tremor that alcohol withdrawal had given him. He called out instructions in a voice that carried authority even through its roughness, telling someone to call 911, telling another person to elevate her feet, telling everyone else to give her space and air. A businessman in a $1,000 suit hesitated before following orders from a man who looked like he'd slept in a doorway, which was exactly where Michael had spent the previous night. Sarah's eyelids fluttered, and she began to come around disoriented and terrified. Michael leaned close, his voice dropping to something gentle and reassuring despite his appearance. He told her not to move, told her she was going to be okay, told her he was a doctor and that he was right there with her. She focused on his face, seeing past the weathered skin and overgrown beard to the steady, compassionate eyes that had once comforted countless patients in sterile hospital rooms. Those eyes held knowledge and kindness in equal measure, and something in Sarah's panic-stricken heart recognized safety when she saw it, regardless of the package it came in. The minutes before the ambulance arrived felt eternal. Michael monitored Sarah's pulse, asked her questions to keep her conscious, assessed her for signs of complications that could threaten both her life and her baby's. He noticed the slight asymmetry in her facial features, the way her left hand wasn't responding quite right, the subtle signs that screamed stroke to someone with his training. He knew they were racing against time, that every second counted, that this young woman and her unborn child needed advanced medical intervention immediately. When the paramedics finally arrived, Michael delivered a rapid-fire clinical assessment that made them stop and stare at this homeless man who spoke in precise medical terminology, who had potentially just identified a pregnancy-related stroke that could have been fatal if undiagnosed. The paramedics worked quickly, loading Sarah onto a stretcher, starting an IV line, preparing for transport. In the chaos of their arrival and departure, Michael quietly stepped back, blending into the crowd of onlookers. He expected to disappear as he always did, to return to his invisible existence on the streets where people looked through him rather than at him. But Sarah, even in her confusion and fear, grabbed a paramedic's sleeve and asked about the man who helped her, insisted they find him, needed to know who he was. The paramedic looked around the dispersing crowd and shrugged, assuming she was disoriented from the medical event. But one passenger, a young woman who had watched the entire scene unfold with tears streaming down her face, had recorded everything on her phone. Not for entertainment or viral content, but because she recognized something profound was happening, something that needed to be witnessed and remembered. Sarah spent 3 days in the hospital. She had indeed suffered a stroke caused by a rare pregnancy complication called preeclampsia that had gone undetected. The doctors told her that early identification had been crucial, that the immediate response had prevented catastrophic brain damage, that whoever had assessed her on that subway had quite literally saved 2 lives. Her daughter was delivered early but healthy through an emergency cesarean section, a perfect 6-pound miracle that Sarah named Grace for the grace that had intervened when she needed it most. But as she held her newborn daughter, as her husband wept with relief and gratitude, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the homeless man whose quick thinking had given her this moment. She needed to find him, needed to thank him, needed to understand how someone living on the streets could possess the knowledge and skill to save her life. The video that the young passenger had posted online went viral within days. Millions of people watched the footage of a disheveled homeless man performing emergency medical care with the precision of a trained professional. The comments sections exploded with speculation, with people sharing the video and demanding to know who he was. Local news stations picked up the story, running segments about the mysterious homeless hero who had disappeared before anyone could thank him. And in a shelter 3 neighborhoods away, Michael Chen watched his own face on a television screen and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. A flicker of the person he used to be, the doctor who had taken an oath to do no harm, the man who had found purpose in healing. Sarah's search for Michael became obsessive. She posted on social media, contacted homeless outreach programs, walked the streets near the subway station with Grace bundled against her chest, showing his picture to anyone who would look. Her husband thought she should let it go, that perhaps the man wanted to remain anonymous, but Sarah couldn't. This wasn't just about gratitude anymore. It was about the haunting recognition that someone with such profound skills and knowledge was living on the streets, forgotten and discarded by a society that had clearly failed him. It was about the shame she felt for all the times she had walked past homeless people without seeing their humanity, without wondering about their stories, without recognizing that circumstances and tragedy could reduce any of us to life on the margins. 3 weeks after the subway incident, a social worker from a downtown homeless outreach program contacted Sarah. They had found Michael Chen, had convinced him to come in from the cold, had learned his story of loss and grief, and the slow dissolution of a life that had once been full of purpose and respect. The program was working to get him into treatment, into housing, into the comprehensive support that could help him rebuild. But Michael had made one request. He wanted to meet Sarah and her baby, wanted to know that they were truly okay, wanted to see the outcome of the last medical intervention he thought he'd ever perform. The meeting took place in a quiet room at the outreach center. Michael had showered and shaved, wore donated clothes that actually fit, looked almost like the distinguished surgeon he had once been, though his eyes still carried the weight of immeasurable grief. Sarah walked in with Grace sleeping peacefully in her arms, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Sarah crossed the room and, with tears streaming down her face, thanked the man who had saved her daughter's life before she was even born. She thanked him for seeing her when she fell, for acting when others froze, for being exactly where he needed to be in the moment, when it mattered most. Michael held baby Grace with hands that trembled slightly but held her with the gentle confidence of someone who understood how precious and fragile life could be. He looked at this tiny person who existed because he had remembered his training in a moment of crisis, and something in his shattered heart began to mend. It didn't erase the loss of his own wife and daughter. It didn't undo the years of pain and homelessness and feeling like a ghost haunting the edges of the world. But it reminded him that he still had value, that his skills and knowledge still mattered, that perhaps his story wasn't finished after all. Sarah and her family didn't just thank Michael and walk away. They became part of his support system, checking in regularly, helping him navigate the bureaucracy of getting his medical license reinstated, connecting him with therapists who specialized in grief and trauma. Sarah started a foundation to help homeless individuals with professional backgrounds reconnect with their former careers, recognizing that Michael's story wasn't unique, that countless skilled people had fallen through society's cracks and needed comprehensive support to climb back out. The viral video that had found Michael became the launching point for a larger conversation about how we see and serve our most vulnerable neighbors. A year later, Michael Chen stood in a community health clinic that served unhoused and low-income populations, wearing scrubs again for the first time in years. He wasn't performing open heart surgery anymore, but he was providing medical care to people who desperately needed it, people who reminded him of where he had been, people who deserved dignity and healing regardless of their circumstances. On the wall of his small office hung a photo of him holding baby Grace on the day they met, a reminder that redemption can happen in the most unexpected moments, that the skills we develop in one chapter of our lives never truly leave us. That being seen and valued can be the first step back from the edge of hopelessness. Sarah visited the clinic regularly with Grace, now a healthy, thriving toddler who knew Dr. Michael as the kind man who loved to make her laugh. Every time Sarah watched him interact with his patients, treating each person with the same care and respect regardless of their situation, she was reminded of the profound truth that the subway had taught her, that we never know who someone really is by looking at their exterior, that everyone has a story written in invisible ink that only compassion and attention can reveal, that the person we dismiss or avoid might be exactly the person we need when our own moment of crisis arrives. If this story touched your heart, if it changed how you'll see the people you pass on the street, if it reminded you that everyone deserves dignity and a second chance, please share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling us about a time when someone surprised you or when you were reminded not to judge by appearances. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the resilience of the human spirit and the unexpected heroes who walk among us. Because the world needs more people who look past the surface and see the person underneath, who understand that circumstances don't define worth, and who believe that it's never too late for redemption and renewal.